So I might go ahead and get started and welcome all of you. My name is Veronica Doerr. I'm the Research Program Manager for Climate Change at ACIAR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. And I'm so glad to have you here today. ACIAR is very excited to be a gold sponsor for the program. And as I was just saying, we really want this session to be interactive. I've got a bit of talking and some slides. But then we're going to use a mixture of, I really encourage you to just actively use the chat. So please type into the chat at any time, anything that's on your mind, to really talk with each other. And I'll have a chance to copy the chat and look at it afterwards as well. So you're talking with me, but I probably won't be able to read the chat while we're going, but I'll read it afterwards. So please really do use that chat as a primary interactive function. We've got a few polls that I'm going to have you complete that then will lead us into some open discussions. So I don't quite know how many people we'll end up having. It can be hard to have an open discussion with lots of people on Zoom, but we're going to try to guide it as best we can in just a short 1 hour session. So I'm really excited to be talking with you guys today about the role of learning in climate adaptation. And I think some of you are equally passionate about this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can do the little bit of introduction that I'm going to do. And then we'll work our way to a poll and kick off to the first conversation. So to me, adaptation is essentially a learning challenge. It's about how we meet this changing baseline of the world around us, and so I've structured this session around why, how, and who researchers and development practitioners can support to learn. So as I said, we'll use the chat function, hopefully quite a lot. We'll use the polls, and then when we try to have a live discussion, you should be able to use the raise hand function to be able to be called on to speak with everyone. And if you don't see that function, it'll be either in the participants box or in the reactions, depending on the version of Zoom that you have. So, so to kick us off, I need to figure out how to actually advance my slides. There we go. So I do need to give you just a quick introduction to ACIAR and the new climate change program, because not all of you may be familiar with ACIAR. So our vision is a world full of sustainable food systems that reduce poverty and improve livelihoods. We support research that's for and in development. So a real blend of research and development action, where the research is learning what's going to work, how it fits in social and political contexts. And even though we often talk about our research, we're a research funder. We use foreign aid funds to pay for research done in partnership between usually Australian research experts and those in the partner countries that we work in. And that's a really important phrase, partner countries. We don't just fund research, we act as partnership brokers. So we maintain a country network, people who are in offices in Vietnam, in the Pacific Islands, based in Fiji, a variety of different offices. And those people help maintain relationships with partner country governments and research institutes. And that really helps us design our research in ways that are truly grounded in the needs of the countries that we work with. The climate change program just commenced September of last year. So ACIAR didn't have a dedicated climate change program before that. And so therefore, I haven't inherited a big portfolio yet. It's my job over the next probably about 3 years to build us up to a full complement of research investments that are centered around the purpose of the climate change program. And that purpose is really important, because the intent in setting up the program was not to pull all climate change considerations out of all of the rest of our work. We all know that climate change is one of those challenges that is cross-sectoral. It needs to be embedded in everything we do and everything we think about. The purpose in setting up the program was to recognize that many of our other programs are fairly sectoral. There's a crops program, a livestock program. but many of the climate adaptation and mitigation responses are actually systems responses. They're cross-sectoral. And therefore, if we're going to take that more kind of transformative systems approach, we need a dedicated program to do it. So because we're sitting here in the climate adaptation stream within the conference, the adaptation focus within the program, and the program's about 2/3 adaptation, 1/3 mitigation. The adaptation focus is really on transformative adaptation. And I use the word transformative quite deliberately, the way the World Resources Institute is using it, to refer to adaptation as a process whereby we work to actively transform ourselves. And I think that's a really, really exciting proposition, and I'm super excited to lead this program. Now, the reason this session's entitled Co-Design is that that's actually a critically important part of the way ACIAR works. So most of our research projects, we would say, are very much co-designed with researchers, with our country network, with our stakeholders in our partner countries. And so there are three key ways in which co-design happens. One is in building a program strategy. And because I'm a brand new program, it's a great opportunity to do that now. And I'm really hoping that this session is actually part of the co-design process for my program strategy. Our project concepts, our ideas for what it is we want budget to fund next, those are due in May each year. And in fact, there's co-design in helping us even come up with those ideas that we want to put forward. Once an idea is allocated budget, we then work usually in a very collaborative co-design process with people who we've asked to be our project leaders to prepare those proposals to get to the point of the ultimate decision of finally funding and starting to contract. So there are these three key opportunities for co-design. And for me, in my strategy, because the program is so brand new, adaptive learning is a really key part of my strategy, but it's not deeply fleshed out yet. So the way I thought about it thus far is reflective of really a co-design that's been largely with CSIRO's climate resilience and adaptation researchers and practitioners. I've come to this role from CSIRO, and so I have a network of people who I've worked with for some time who've really informed my thinking here, and you'll hear their voices come through today. Today, though, is about deepening that conversation and expanding it to a broader network, like you guys, and to help me kind of think through in more depth, how do I invest in action-oriented research that will make a difference when it comes to adaptive learning and climate adaptation. So that's really enough of an introduction about where we're going. What I'd like to do is share with you some voices from my CSIRO colleagues and myself, of course, around a couple of key big questions. And then these are going to lead us to a specific poll and a discussion. So my first big question is, why is adaptive learning so essential to climate adaptation? You know, I've said it's really important to me, but exactly why? Why is this such an important part of adaptation? And so when I think about my views and work with my colleagues from CSIRO, there are three key answers that emerge. And one is that the goals of adaptation will inherently be emergent. We cannot specify them fully and completely right now. And that's because, as Deb O'Connell highlighted, we're outside, or we're about to be, outside the bounds of historical experience. We cannot set our goals and make our decisions based on knowledge of the past, which is usually the way humans like to operate. And as part of that, Mike Dunlop highlighted, we don't really know how to cope with large amounts of change. Thus far, we've only seen small amounts of change, but large amounts of change are coming. And in that sort of context, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly what our goals are. And Yehias Maru has highlighted that in fact, we can say roughly the goals have to involve, to some degree, shifting out of the current paths that we're on and the dependencies that those create. And that's really about changing political and cultural paradigms. And we don't know exactly how to do that. The process of cultural change is not one that can be completely predetermined. So our goals need to be emergent. Another reason why adaptive learning is such an essential part of adaptation, in my mind and in CSIRO's mind, it is that the complexity of what we're doing here means that the outcomes of our actions are always going to be somewhat uncertain. So the climate drivers themselves are uncertain because they're dependent on global socio-political forces that we can't control, as always highlighted by Mark Stafford Smith. So James Butler has made it clear then that, that because we're acting upon complex systems, then the outcomes of our actions are always going to be to some degree unforeseen. There's an inevitable sense of surprise that we will find as we take this journey. So we need to be nimble and reflexive to deal with those unforeseen outcomes. And finally, Min Nguyen has highlighted that adaptation, as we've learned with digging into it over the last 10, 20 years, it needs to be locally suited. It needs to be context dependent. So you can't just take an action that had a particular outcome over here and do that same action over here and expect the same outcome. There aren't cookie cutter approaches. So the outcomes of our actions are always going to be a little bit uncertain. We need to actively learn about those. And finally, the third reason why adaptive learning is so essential, and I think this is a critically important one, is that learning is actually a positive human response to all of that uncertainty and disruption. A learning mindset is an essential entry point for innovation. It creates a sense of possibility, motivation, and resilience, thanks to Shona Mahog. So those are three key reasons why I think adaptive learning is so essential. I'm hoping that you are furiously jumping into the chat and typing other reasons or disagreeing with me, and please feel free to do that. And while you do that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to ask my technical assistant, Tim, to please put up the first poll, because I'm going to ask everyone to participate in a little bit of voting that will guide us in our discussion next. So here's the first poll. What I'm really trying to get out of you here is, how often do you think adaptation projects are really have an explicit goal of supporting the people they're trying to support to learn in an ongoing way? Is that an explicit goal of adaptation projects you've been part of? And then the second question is about your experience of learning as giving a sense of positivity and progress. So take a moment, please, to answer the poll. Excellent. And I can see here the percentages of responses coming through and the numbers of people who voted. So just a minute more. I want this to be real quick. Sorry. Okay. We're going to go ahead and close the poll. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. I think we did. And Tim, if you could go ahead and share those poll results so that everyone can see them. All right. So this is fascinating to me, right? So how often do adaptation projects have an explicit goal of supporting people to learn in an ongoing way? And we're almost equally divided between most of the time and rarely. So that sounds like a perfect jumping off point for discussion. So please raise your hand and I'll happily call on you, but I'd really like to hear from some people who said most of the time and some people who said rarely, so we can try to understand this kind of divergent experience. So please share with us your experience. Who's willing to have a bit of a go?
Oh, look. I can go, Veronica, because no one else is putting their hand up.
Lovely, please. Jump on in.
I guess my experience, I couldn't pick one because I wanted to say should be. Can you hear me okay? Or
Yes, I'm just realizing I don't have the view of all of you. So
okay.
I see me writ large. So
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to tick the box of should be, but isn't often. And I think the difficulty is the discovery learning component of that is very difficult to do under complex situations. So if we look at it as a methodology, adaptive management, was one of the first methodologies to explicitly link these multi-stakeholder projects to policy change through reflective learning. That's what it was about, but it hasn't actually happened that way over time. And I can see because discovery learning is about vulnerability in itself with people. So there can be lots of learning going on, but it's not discovery learning, which doesn't help people move forward. So that's
excellent
point.
Yeah. So that distinction between, actually just saying you're doing learning, it doesn't necessarily equate to what it is we're talking about here. Maybe Shona has her hand up. Shona would like to jump in and contribute.
Yes, I'm trying to navigate the system at the same time. Thanks, Veronica. And thanks, Christine. Discovery learning is a new term that I'm eager to learn more about. I'm going to share something that came out of a climate adaptation conference a couple of years ago in Cape Town. And one of the biggest challenges that a lot of the projects in our session had was that funders saw learning as something that we could do on the side, and it wasn't explicitly funded or supported to actually do collectively, recognizing it has to happen over a longer term. So I think that's actually a challenge for a lot of the projects, is to incorporate that.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic, Shona. I think it is a challenge, and a little bit later in the discussion, we might get to some of the specific tools and processes that help us bring that in. Samantha Keys Ryan, you've got your hand up.
I think it's important, but I think it's a critical distinction, as I said in the chat, whether we're talking about top-down learning or dialogical two-way adaptive learning. That's a really critical thing. I presented my participatory action research at the research at another conference, the sustainability conference, with Dr. Welchman Geggio, who's an Indigenous epistemologist, and he made this really important point that Indigenous epistemology, so that's how Indigenous knowledge is constructed, Indigenous knowledge systems, is it is learning and adaptation in action. And so I think that that's really important, that often it's not acknowledged that we're not working from zero with people, and so we can try and enforce learning in a very top-down, unequal fashion. And I think that it would really, like, the two-way flow of learning and a more kind of adaptive approach to learning is really important as well.
Thank you. That's excellent, and I think that's very much what I mean. I think if we're gonna incorporate learning as part of adaptation, right? Recognizing the way these, the way the climate scenarios play out, like the increasing pace of change. Regardless of whether your mindset is kind of ethically and morally aligned around that participatory and dialectic type of learning, it becomes actually necessary, I think, to navigate that fast changing future. Who else would like to jump into the conversation? Or do we want some responses? I saw Shona nodding vigorously to Samantha's comments.
I was just going to add, Veronica, that this conference is about, vulnerability and being in vulnerable situations, particularly with COVID. And I put it in the comment section, but it's hard for people to be vulnerable. And you actually need to be vulnerable to be part of reflective, engaging, participatory discovery learning processes. You actually need to be very connected and vulnerable to do that. And that's the very situation that you can't be when you're in a vulnerable situation yourself. When you're actually in a very confident, constrained, known situation, it's very easy to be vulnerable. But the situations we're talking about, it's actually hardest. So for me, that's a big challenge.
That's exactly one of the things that's coming through in the chat. I don't know if Colin would be comfortable speaking with us, but I think there's an excellent comment in the chat about that. Colin, would you be like to put your voice in?
Yeah, I guess I'm just reinforcing what Christine was saying, really, that the people most affected by climate change have the least opportunity, margin, space to experiment with things and try things. We found that with introducing farming practices to people. They've got a system that works okay, but they're reluctant to leave it behind for a system that might work much better because they only know this one system that works okay. So it's a dilemma, and I don't really have an answer, but I think we have to feel with those people who are in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and perhaps recognize when and where there are windows of opportunity, like when they're just people are just stretched too far, right? And there actually just is no space for learning, versus when there's potentially the opportunity to engage a little bit more, and usually that requires a bit of anticipatory work, which is going to kind of feed into the next slide and the next dialogue. So before I get there, there's a couple of good chats coming through. Is there anyone else who wants to kind of speak at the moment around this kind of our challenge of the kind of, some people say it happens lots of the times in projects and some people say it happens rarely. And I think what we're getting to here is actually that perhaps those two different responses are both a kind of mixture of our own experience, but also of the fact that there's a very particular type of learning that needs to happen here, which may not be so common. So it looks like perhaps Shona wants to say one more thing, and that would be lovely. Shona, speak up, please.
I'll be very short. So one of the insights that came out of some of our work in Southeast Asia with research partners rather than people directly impacted in communities is that there were very different expectations, cultural expectations around learning. And it took quite a long time to actually have these participatory reflection discussions about what worked and what didn't in projects, because in some of these cultures, to even reflect that something was going suboptimally was, to use Christine's word, very vulnerable. And it was not a cultural context where they had ever reflected on what hadn't worked in a project before.
Yeah, look, I think that's critically important, and the theme of vulnerability is coming through very strongly, and thinking about how we navigate that effectively. Anyone else wanted to have one final comment before we shift the discussion a little bit? Okay, thank you so much for the really active chat. I see some great things coming through there, and I look forward to engaging with them more deeply when I have a chance to sit down properly and read them. But what I wanted to do was make sure that that we could move on a little bit to not just the kind of why and the broad brush, but now let's talk about if we're talking about particular types of learning, if we're talking about particular ways of approaching this to meet those goals that may be particularly unique to the kind of disruption that climate change creates, well, then we need to start thinking about not just why, but how. What are the particular types of approaches that we need to use here? So this is where I've gone to my next slide. And again, this is a kind of mixture of my own thoughts and my former colleagues at CSIRO. And I hope you'll find our collective thoughts valuable. So, so the big question, how can we support adaptive learning, comes up with 4 different answers, really. And 2 of them are about kind of particular tools or methods. They can be used in a variety of different ways. They can be codified in different ways. And then 2 of them are about more like the kind of below the line processes, if you will. So the first sort of tools that came up were anticipatory or even imaginative learning processes. So as Mike Dunlop has said, the future will be very different. We need to imagine it in order to support action. But we need to do that imagining in an evidence-based way. And related to that, Deb O'Connell said, we therefore need to be able to build on the predictive capacity that we do have, but then anticipate in order to support action. So that those types of approaches are wrapped up in what we might think of as anticipatory learning. Then the other process or broad set of tools that kind of came out that absolutely everybody agreed on was we need to focus on triple loop learning. So if you're not familiar with triple loop learning, it essentially is the first loop is the kind of thing that in many ways we're most familiar with. You know, are we doing things right? With the stuff that we implemented, did we implement it well, right? And that's often what monitoring and evaluation in development is based on. The second loop, the strategy loop, are we doing the right things? Did we pick the right strategy? Is this the right way to go? And sometimes monitoring and evaluation in development extends to that sort of strategy loop, but not always. And then the third loop is about paradigms. So did we actually have the right goals, the right values? Did we select the right kind of general direction pathway in the first place? And it's that third loop that we often rarely get to. But actually, when we're trying to face climate adaptation and we're trying to do it in a systems change kind of way, well, that's actually about, you know, fundamentally changing the way systems work, the relationships between the elements in a system to get a very different outcome. And that probably extends more toward the paradigm loop than anything else. So how much are we actually asking those paradigm type learning questions? And then the other responses are about the way in which we support learning processes, which has already been coming out in the discussion. So making it participatory, active, social, and democratized. Min says that, you know, it's really about this mutual capacity building with governments, communities, researchers, and the private sector. They all need to be taking actions that are roughly aligned to move a system in a new and different direction. So they all need to be learning together in some way, shape, or form. Shona emphasizes that participatory and social processes help make it an active process, not passive. And active learning is much more likely to lead to changed action. And Yehias reminds us that learning is a political sort of act as well as a technical one. And so we need to consider creating safe spaces and navigating power dynamics. And finally, Mark Stafford Smith has highlighted that in addition to all the individual and informal and what feels like a very social process of learning, if we want this to really take us forward in terms of sustained innovation, we need to embed learning in knowledge management systems. We need specific tools and systems that give rigor and confidence to development funders, to key decision makers, confidence that they can begin with open-ended flexibility without it being too open-ended, that it will still go somewhere. And an example he gives is that using the technique of theory of change, which is often used at the start of a project, but using that as a tool for regular reflective learning and adjustment can be a kind of codified process that helps give confidence that you can start open-ended, but still end up really achieving outcomes. So those are just some of our reflections. What I'd like to do now, again, is have another poll open, and that poll might guide us to a specific discussion. So Tim, if you could share the second poll, please. Here we go. So there are 3 questions in this one. So you might just need to scroll down a little bit. And it's really about your experience with using anticipatory learning or triple loop learning, whether you've used other processes, maybe ones you like better, and whether you're actively researching and experimenting with new tools and techniques, or ways to make these things ever more kind of specific and codified. So I'll give you a minute to think and answer the poll question. So not quite half of you have answered the questions. So if a couple more people want to jump in, please do so, because we'll close the poll soon. All right, that'll do. Tim, if you could close the poll and make sure we can all see the results, that would be fantastic. So I love this one. So for the first question, what we see is that interestingly, roughly a third of you have heard of anticipatory learning and triple loop learning, and you use them and you think they're great. Another third of you have never heard of them before. So I hope we've opened your eyes to some things you want to go away and explore. And then another third of you kind of, maybe you haven't used those terms, but you feel like you've done something similar under a different name. So that's really exciting. And then three-quarters of you have used other approaches to structured adaptive learning, and more than half of you are actively researching or experimenting with different or more specific ways of applying these things to support adaptive learning. So I think that's where I'd really like to open the discussion. I'm hoping some of you who've used other tools or are actively researching and experimenting with other ways to go or ways to make these more specific, I'm hoping you'll be willing to jump in and share those experiences. So yeah, feel free to close the poll and feel free to jump in the chat, but also please raise your hand and hear your lovely voices. Who would like to share a tool or a process that they've been using to support adaptive learning in climate adaptation?
Hi, Veronica.
Hello.
Good afternoon. I am Kevin. I'm dialing in from Papua New Guinea.
Welcome, Kevin.
I'm an advocate. Thanks. I'm vision impaired. I'm blind. I'm an advocate for disability inclusion. I've been listening to the whole of today's session. All of the sessions are great, but I'm really excited about this session, your session, because it's really interactive. I just want to share my experience as an advocate and a specialist in disability inclusive development. Disability inclusion is an evolving concept. So when we go to a community or when we are trying to conduct a workshop, we actually must have an audience, must have an interactive session with the audience first to understand the local context and the settings, and then we tailor the sessions, according to the local context. But the main human rights approaches remains. All we just do is just interact with the audience, understand the local context, the method of delivery, and then I do the session. So it's more or less like experimenting. It's a bit really challenging, but as advocate in that space, most of what we do are based on our lived experiences of experiencing challenges. So it makes it a bit easier in terms of trying to experiment and deliver trainings according to suit the target audience and the local context. So I just thought I'd like to share this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate that. I think one of the things we've often found in our work is actually that people who have experienced adversity or who might be, you know, widely considered or labeled vulnerable people in our communities are often actually particularly open to learning. We know that vulnerability and resilience go hand in hand. And actually the most vulnerable people are often actually the most resilient and the most ready to learn and grow and change really quickly. So you know, be really interested to think a little bit more about the specific techniques that you guys use, because you know, when you open your workshops and you quickly kind of get into the local context, because I think that could be really helpful to all of us.
Yeah.
If you have resources to share, please do let us know.
So.
I'm happy to give a contribution, Veronica, if you I can explain the triple loop learning. If I just tell the group here but who haven't been involved in this type of process and how it, for me, it's something that takes a lot of time. And I'll talk about an ACIAR project that I was involved with in India in the late 90s or mid 90s to late 90s. And, you know, it was a 5 to 7 year process of doing single, double and triple loop learning in this parallel process. And initially, and I think that came up before in some of the chat questions, that this is about discovery learning of all stakeholders, including the funding bodies, because we spent the first year of our project using, well, I was using discovery learning approaches because at that point ACIAR was actually not doing any participatory research, and our funding body was saying to us, we want you to do all the research on research stations. And we worked with our funding body for a year to get them to do the discovery learning for themselves. So we had them out there doing things and digging. We had our ACIAR rep digging in the ground. And he, you know, after a year, he came to the conclusion, oh, gee, maybe we should do participatory research. And then he supported us. And then we went into the soil organization that we were working with. And we then worked with, you know, male scientists. And we worked with them for a year to go through this discovery learning process to go, oh, maybe we should bring our female scientists into this process. And then we worked with male and female scientists to go through this discovery learning process where maybe we should actually go on farm with, and then they worked with male farmers. And then we worked with all of that group. And then after a year, they came to this conclusion, maybe we should bring female farmers into this process, you know, of learning. And then after another year, because in 2 of the villages we worked in, there were Indigenous community. After that point, it was like another year, a lot of process to go, oh, maybe we should bring the Indigenous community involved in this. So, you know, it was this sort of, and then, you know, we've got this lovely photograph of the beginning of the project where there were a couple of male scientists pointing down at everybody and there was hardly anyone there, and they were using this rainfall simulator. And at the end of 5 years, there was this whole community of colourful Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and everyone sort of exploring this process around this rainfall simulator. And it took this sort of big 5 to 7 year project for this very visual process and this thing to happen. And for me, the biggest thing out of that project is that at the end of 5 years, the research organisation over there, which did no on-farm research and no participatory research at the end of 5 years, had embedded in all of their policy that every project had to go through some sort of participatory, like a participatory framework to assess who was participating and in what way and how at the end of 5 to 7 years. so for me, it's really powerful, but it takes time. And it's very hard when we're experiencing things like COVID and vulnerability and whatever, for that whole process and that time, you know, place to, you know, and we were doing triple loop learning back then. So, and
Yeah,
ACIAR
so
embraced it, you know, but they had to go through that discovery learning as well, and so did everybody else. You know?
And so I guess that's where I'm gonna kind of push. I might try to put Michelle Redman on the spot if she's willing, because I'm liking a few of the things in the chat. So I'm thinking about, so, you know, when it comes to climate adaptation, we don't have time. We don't have time to go through all of that. We need to find ways to accelerate that. And I'm wondering if we can kind of, given that what we've said about vulnerability, right, and that actually learning, you know, for people, it's about being in a place that feels vulnerable. And Michelle's put a comment in the chat about people with the greatest power maybe trying on some more learning vulnerability. And I wonder if we had ways to deliberately do that, would that help accelerate the process? Michelle, what do you think, if you're willing to chime in?
Actually, I feel like I should defer to my colleague, David McLaren, who's working very closely with the Baru Conservation Alliance. I am less closely, but I'm thinking about the work that we've been doing with villages in East Puyo on Malaysia, and thinking about the people who have the most vulnerability take the greatest risks, and yet for those who have more, and communities can lead that work, but for those who have the least risk, it's those who just come and go, you know, so we have choices. For example, those of us who don't belong there and don't have to put up with the outcomes of the climate change, the sea level rise, the shit coming into your village, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, so I was thinking, you know, we kind of like, we hurry, like you say, we have project cycles, we hurry things, we step back when it's not working, we save face by writing it in certain ways. There's a whole lot of stuff that we do to mitigate our own risk because we have methods to do that as people from outside, but you don't have that opportunity if it's your world and you're the one that truly is vulnerable in the context. So I just want to challenge the word vulnerable though, because I think there's a lot of power in those communities, and we're seeing a lot of community-led, locally led adaptation, which is very exciting. So just being a bit mindful about the use of that word too. If that starts some more conversation, but yeah.
No, you're super, that's absolutely correct, Michelle, yeah. And that's why, in fact, I sometimes say people who would be traditionally labeled as vulnerable, right? Samantha, you've got your hand up. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I wanted to, so I hadn't heard of triple loop learning before, but I had, what I'd done was, what I did in my research, my doctoral research, was 3 participatory action research learning loops. So the first one was talking to water management practitioners in Solomon Islands about how they were engaging with communities and coming up with some kind of gaps and challenges and tensions. And then second one, going in and working with Solomon Islands National University about what community engagement processes might work. And then they came on board with me in the third one, and we went to Barana Community Nature and Heritage Park, which is just outside of Honiara in the Solomon Islands. And the learning process that we ended up coming up with was intergenerational dialogue around past, present, and future using photo stories. So the young people went around the park, took pictures of the water sources as they were in the past, as they were now, and then how they could be in the future, made these photo stories, and then we showed them to the elders in the community, who were able to remix the photos into their own stories in response. And then through that, talking about what is from the past that's a strength that we want to use that informs what we're doing now in terms of our conservation effort, that informs where we're going to go into the future. And so that was like a quite powerful experience of like horizontal kind of learning within the community to kind of think through these problems and that kind of active adaptation of their own knowledge system.
That sounds really inspiring, and I love the learning through stories, because that's such an important kind of cultural practice for so many people. You know, and those of us who maybe, you know, don't have it embedded as a cultural practice, well, we used to. We've just lost it. So if you have any outputs from that are shareable, please feel free to pop the links into the chat. I'm sure people would love to read more about that. Now, we only have a few more minutes because I have to leave you with a little bit of time to get out and, you know, get a cup of tea if you need to before our final closing plenary session. And so there's one more really important kind of question that I wanted to highlight with you guys. And, you know, we've talked about why, we've talked about how, but now actually we need to talk about who. And here I've framed it as who most needs support to learn. And that's the choice of words there is really important. I don't mean it to be, you know, who's crap at learning and needs support. What I mean it as is I feel it's the job of researchers, not like this isn't about our own learning, right? That's inherent in what we do. We're learners, and right. But this is actually about how we understand and design the tools that help other people learn in these ways that we're talking about, have them empowered to own that and take it forward in the long term when our projects are over and they're still living the life that they're experiencing. So again, when I consulted my former CSIRO colleagues and I put their thoughts together with my own, there are two answers that may seem a little bit contradictory, but they're actually not really. The first one is that, in fact, it's all the key actors in a system that need to learn together. Because as we've talked about a little bit already, you've got lots of different people who need to make decisions and lots of different people who need to be pulling in similar directions. But really tapping into some of, in particular, what we've been talking about in terms of vulnerability. James Butler highlighted it's really critical to bring the powerful and the less powerful together to democratize that process of learning. And Shona, again, who's been very kind to join us today, she tends to remind me that it, you know, even though we talk about organizational learning and there's, you know, that's an avenue of research endeavor, in many ways, the process of learning is still something that individuals do, but they do so in the context of social networks. So if we want a system to change, we have to facilitate the social network across the system so that they can learn together. And then the other response I get is that, well, really, we need to be able to identify the leaders or the other big players in the system, because the notion that everyone who's part of a system is going to learn together is just a little too big, right? So who are these key people who are most important? And Min highlighted that, well, it's really the job of leaders to listen and to make informed decisions. And because they're making decisions often that affect the whole system, it's critical to target them. And you know, in a similar vein, Deb O'Connell has said, we need to concentrate on those who have leverage in the system. And I think that phrase is really important because it means sometimes they're not the obvious people, right? So there are obvious leaders like government leaders and whatnot, but they're not always necessarily the people who have the most leverage. So those were our thoughts, and while we won't have too much time for discussion, I wanted to leave you with, I wanted to do one more poll that helps us be a little bit interactive, and we may have time for a couple of quick comments after that one. So Tim, I think he's put up the third poll, which is taking up the whole screen now, but maybe not for you, but it's just one simple question. Do the adaptation projects that you work with tend to work, you think, with the people who have the most leverage to change the system? All right, we've got about 40% of you who voted. Oh, good, 53, 56, 59, excellent. Excellent, you're engaged with this one. That's good. Woo! Everybody's voting. All right, 75% have voted. Oh, 78, okay. Very good. I'm going to say, Tim, if you can close the poll and just show us the results. This is really, really encouraging to me. So, so between all of the time and most of the time, we're working with the people who have the most leverage to change the system. The response has been 83%. So you think by and large, our projects really are doing a good job of targeting the people who have leverage. 21% of you have said rarely. So, you know, I think that's a really interesting result, and I'm excited, right? That's a great result to have. We have, you know, maybe 1 or 2 minutes for a quick comment or two. Certainly feel free to type in the chat what you think about this. But what I would ask is a quick response, maybe from 1 or 2 people about, you know, so if you think you really are targeting the people with leverage, how do you do that? What has enabled you to really find and connect with those people? Is there anyone who wants to offer any thoughts about that? Colin Scott, I'm sorry, you've said soccer field analogy. You need to explain that one to me. Nope.
I'm just asking about what Christine's referring to in her comment.
Okay, oh, there we go. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So I think.
No, I don't want to. It'll take. I can talk with you later, Colin.
Thank you.
One of the things I've been thinking of that enables you to make sure you're targeting people who have leverage in the system is that you begin your work with a systems analysis, right? Where you map out, you know, who are the players, what are the flows of information and decisions, decision mapping, and sometimes funders are a little bit reluctant to do that because they want to jump straight into, well, what are we going to do? But I think it's really important to fund that systems understanding piece, and not, you know, you could spend 20 years, you know, fleshing out your understanding of a system, right? But you've got to do it well enough that you can structure your work, your interventions beyond that. I think that's what I think. All right, so we are going to get unceremoniously kicked off in just a minute, I believe. So I just simply want to leave you with my slide of parting thoughts.